So welcome to our lecture for Module 9 in BAAS 3020. We're looking at quantitative and survey studies, and I have an interesting photograph of myself there. This is from one of my walks across Europe. Often the places, these walks are that I've done have been modeled after Catholic pilgrimages, and pellegrino means pilgrim in Italian. And you have all these really inexpensive places to stay for about $9 a night, often with kitchens, etc. And you meet incredibly interesting people around the world. But I have a funny story about this. This is how I would sign the guest book typically, because I'm from Texas. I was wearing a cowboy hat or something. And so I was signing all the books this way. Anyway, so I'm having a particularly tough day. I don't know what happened, but I don't think I ate well, and I had a lot of climbing. I was in the mountains. I had this one point where I only had to go a mile, but it was in this dry stream bed, very rocky and slippery, but it was very steep. And I hit this point where I just kind of bottomed out mentally and physically, and I would walk 5 steps and then I'd sit down frustrated, hungry and tired. And I finally, I finally get to the top. Luckily, there's a restaurant there, and I get recharged. It's a lovely experience, and I continue on my day. And I see some other hikers, and I can tell that they're confused because we're walking along the road now, and the directions tell us to take the road. It's quicker than getting off the road onto various hiking paths. So I'm trying to catch up to them, trying to give them advice not to go. And as I get to them, they turn around and I just say hello, and they say, "Hello, are you Michael Bailey?" And all of a sudden, after the day I've had where I've gone from complete meltdown to meal to this, like there's a part of me that thinks maybe I've died and gone, wherever you go, because it just was so surreal. I'm in the middle of nowhere in Italy that I don't know anyone. I'm hiking alone, and these people know my name. Well, as the story goes on, they had seen my markings in these guidebooks along the way, so there's a very logical explanation, but it totally freaked me out. All right, let's continue on. And this is Module 9. We have our textbook, 100 questions. We're going to be looking at questions 51 through 70. In 52 Things About Customer Analytics, we're going to be looking at the things number 25 through 35. He also calls them chapters. In Canvas, we have a number of articles and writings. Of course, we have a glossary on surveys as quantitative inquiry tools, survey administration and composition, and then we have 3 really cool videos: why you should love statistics, how statistics can be misleading, and better user inquiry through surveys. I know you're thinking, yeah, they're really fun if they're about statistics, but they really are kind of fun, and don't miss them. They're pretty short. 2 of them are TED Talks, etc. In this module, you just have a module quiz, and then of course we have discussion for this week. Our next set of questions from our text is from part 6, conducting the survey. 51, once designed, how is a survey conducted? Surveys can be either administered by a trained interviewer or self-administered, where the participants will actually fill out the survey by themselves. You have to decide, which method you're going to use depending upon the resources you have, who the participants are, and some of their background, how complicated the survey is, and what kind of response rate that you need. How often can we contact the sample to get participation? While it's possible that participants will complete the survey after the first interaction, this is not very common. Most people will either pause. People are busy, so if you send them an email, they may just save it. If you send them mail through the post, it may stand on their shelf, etc. So this typically means that multiple contacts with the participants are needed. But you have to balance the cost of it. Calling people, following up can be expensive. If you're actually mailing the survey, mailing multiple copies can be expensive. And so you have to balance kind of the costs of things, the desire of your survey, also with people's right not to participate if they choose not to. You don't want to stalk people, and you don't want to go from persistent to annoying. How are potential members of a sample contacted? Sending a survey to participants without introduction or advanced warning is not very successful. So you might send a postcard or a letter introducing the survey. The message on the letter should be persuasive. It needs to convince the members of the importance of the survey and how it's relevant to them, and try to engage them enough that they will want to participate. Even if you're knocking on doors, it's suggested that sending out a postcard that's very graphic, storytelling, and engaging is a way to kind of prime the pump for your members to want to engage in it. Contacting the participants is just the first step. Persuading them to participate is a bigger problem. Number 54, how are sample members persuaded to participate? Participants are persuaded by caring for the survey's purpose. Start by branding your survey, find trigger words that might interest people, and try to figure out how to connect the people, the potential participant, with the content. There's a great example here in the reading, a sample postcard about traffic. If people can see themselves in the purpose of your survey, then you have a much higher likelihood of getting them to participate. 55, what should be included in a cover letter? The cover letter introduces the research and the researcher to the participants. It's also an invitation to participate. It should start with that invitation. It should show appreciation. It should explain the nature of the survey and how long it will take to complete. I can't tell you the number of times I get requested to survey as a professor, and they don't indicate how long the survey will take. And that's an immediate no starter for me. If I don't know if it's a 15 minutes or 3-hour survey, I am not even going to click through on the link. And how can you explain the importance of the study so that it will connect? It's really important, as I mentioned before, to brand your study, to brand all of your communications, and keep sending the same message. You want people to see that they are connected to the topic of it. You can also explain how you selected participants and what kind of person you're looking for. But the more connected I am to the content and the output of the survey, the more likely I'm going to participate. And especially if you're willing to share your results with any of the participants, which you really should do. Number 56, what other strategies can increase participation? An incentive is helpful to create a sense of obligation on the part. Don't think of the incentive as paying, but rather as a token of appreciation. As a professor, I probably get at least 2 to 3 survey requests a week. And I will be quite frank that if someone's offering me, usually it's a cash or an Amazon card incentive, anywhere from 20 to 50 to $100, depending upon the length of the survey, I'm much more likely to respond. You can also be quite creative. They indicate a couple good examples in here that are kind of fun to look at. And again, if you offer to share the results of your study, and people are interested in that and find themselves connected, that can be also a powerful one. '57. How do we keep track of who has and who has not participated? If you're planning to contact participants multiple times and use multiple methods, it might get confusing who has been contacted, how they've been contacted, and the result of that. It's very important to set up files such as a spreadsheet to keep track of contacts and participation. A simple spreadsheet should include the participant's name, a unique identifier, contact information, date of first contact, outcome of the contact, and an ongoing record. This has to be updated frequently, and you need to make sure that you're recording things like when they complete the survey. If they've refused, the worst thing you can do is keep calling someone who's told you that they're not interested. You all know how that is too when you get these marketing calls for the umpteenth time about vehicle warranty or health insurance or whatever, and you've told them repeatedly you're not interested. Or if someone's ineligible, you don't want to keep contacting them. 58. How do we conduct a longitudinal study? Longitudinal panel studies interview the same participants multiple times over several years. So not only do participants have to be persuaded to participate, then they have to be persuaded to stay with the study over that long time. And dropout is a really serious problem for these studies. Also, tracking people can be a problem. If you're doing like a study over a decade, people have moved, and so trying to find them or keep up with them can also be a challenge. So you've got not only the dynamic of trying to keep people engaged with your study, but you also have to keep track of participants. And so it's recommended that you kind of give updates periodic about where the study is, any preliminary findings, but you also have to weigh that against, you don't want to bias the participants by reporting results too soon. So it's a much more tricky thing, and really is longitudinal studies are conducted by really experts in surveying and research. 59. What other survey administration issues may arise? While the data collection is ongoing, you also need to be monitoring. If you're using interviewers, then you need to be debriefing them, finding out what's happening in the interviews, looking at some of the preliminary data in case you have to adjust or do some more training. If it's self-administered where the participants are taking their own surveys, then you need to kind of check and see what's going on. If they all stop at one point, or they don't answer a specific question, maybe that question is confusing. So you just have to keep monitoring it. And while the data collection is going on, you need to be thinking about post-survey. How are you going to collect all the responses? How are you going to analyze them? This could be from a paper perspective and data entry. It could also be from a computer system, making sure that you can analyze the data in a similar computer application. 60. How do we take care of survey participants? So we've been doing a lot about the survey. Now, how do we take care of people? What you really want to keep focus on is you don't want to burden people. So keeping a survey short and focused can help. I don't know if any of you have taken a longer survey where there may be 50, 60 questions. Even telling people where they are in process, to me, has always been a lot more encouraging to continue than to just drop out of it. If I'm at question 50 and I still don't know how many more there are, and there may only be another 5 or 10 questions, well, I'm much more likely to finish than if I have no clue. So kind of having that as part of the survey where I am, or letting me know how many there are in total. Making sure there's easy instructions, it's not confusing. Using good communication strategies, like a lot of white space. You don't want it to look like a 10-foot long page with question, 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 question. If there are Likert scale questions, grouping them together, making sure the answers are clear and not confusing. And if there are sensitive questions, reminding people of confidentiality, or if you're interviewing them, maybe allowing them to write down things on their own or something of that nature. Our next series of questions is from part 7, entering and cleaning the data. Do we need to plan ahead for data entry, cleaning, and analysis? Yes. A lot of people don't do this part. They wait till after they've collected data, then they start planning for how they're going to collect it and analyze it, and realize in doing so that they may have should have redesigned a question, etc. So a little pre-planning can really help, or even running a small pilot can identify some issues with the collection, but it can also identify some issues with actually the survey questions themselves and the data that you're collecting. Especially if, let's say you might need to identify people. thinking through, how do I need to identify them? Do I need to know each individual by their number? Do I just care about groupings? For example, do I care about whether someone did it on email or they did it in mail? Does that make a difference? It might be a piece of data that you don't realize how it might affect, but you might get different results from people who are using mail. Perhaps they don't have computers, and that might impact your survey. So it is very important to pre-plan, and a lot of people don't do this. And I'm a big advocate for pilots because you just learn so much by doing, So anyway, my data is collected. Now what? The hard part is over, but there's still a bit of work left to do. You have to organize the data first in such a way that it can answer your research question. Then it must be cleaned and prepped for analysis. Then you do the analysis, creating tables, graphs, and figures. And then you write up a report or article in which the research question is posed and answered with supporting data. '63, how do we do data entry? So it's a good idea to try to, once you have your survey questions done, think about how you're going to collect the data and enter it into something like a spreadsheet or some kind of database that will allow you to manipulate the information, massage it, look for trends, etc. There's some good suggestions in here about a data entry skeleton, etc. And you can read through that. It's a very short reading. What issues might arise with data entry? There's a few things to look out for. Specifically, a lot of times all participants won't answer all questions or put multiple entries in there. And you have to figure out how to handle this because there can be a variety of reasons why they do that. This is called item non-response. Participants may refuse to answer them. They may be excluded from answering them. They give an example in here where the first question is, do you smoke? And then the next 9 questions are about your smoking habits. Well, of course, if you answer no to the first question, then the other questions are non-applicable. And so you might have codes for all of these different reasons, like it's not applicable, they refuse to answer, they answered multiple things, they don't know, etc. And this is all dependent upon your survey and the information that you're trying to collect and its relevance. 65. What types of questions are difficult to enter into the database? So there's multiple types of questions that can be a struggle to enter in, when they are text responses or open-ended questions, when they are asking you to select any that apply, so you're selecting multiple answers from one specific question, or if people don't feel like they fit into any of the boxes and you have an other, again, where they're putting information in there. And so all of these have different kind of implications for your survey and need a different strategy depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. What is a code book and why is it important? Your code book is kind of like your instruction manual and your cheat sheet, and kind of gives you the background information on the survey. It would contain all the questions exactly as they are. It would contain a list of variables and how you're rating them. It matches the survey responses to the variable values. So there's just a lot of stuff in here, and it really is, if you will, the Bible of your survey, where all the key information and explanations are, so that, again, if you're sharing this information, someone else who's not familiar with the survey needs to know that 1 means male and 2 means female, etc., to interpret the data, etc. So it's very important because it really kind of documents your survey at multiple levels. What other sorts of documentation is needed and why? So we've already talked about the code book, which is the most important. There's something called a syntax, which is kind of like a record, a trail. So if you manipulate variables, as you're doing the analysis and cleaning up, how you've cleaned up, etc., who cleaned up, when they cleaned up, why they cleaned up. So it really is this kind of tracking report that allows you to see kind of the iteration of your survey study, and know who's been manipulating the data and why they did it. So it kind of provides a rationale instead of just all of a sudden noticing that something changed. You also need a technical report. And the technical report kind of just gives you, it's kind of like it's all the raw data plus all the stuff that you've manipulated as well, the analysis, etc. But it's just all of the data there, and so it's kind of like your own library that starts from survey responses to all the way through the analysis. And it's very important too, because again, you've got your raw data in there so someone else can try to recreate what you've done. What is data cleaning? Data cleaning is the process of checking all your variables, okay? And just getting things ready to do the analysis. And they speak to this. Again, this is a little bit more complicated and complex for higher level surveyors than what we're trying to get you in this class. '69, how are other specified responses coded? This just gives you some specific details about when to use it, and then also how you would code it as a variable value. Like if you say that, like they use the example of race, maybe white is 1, black is 2, Asian is 3, Hispanic 4, etc. And you go down to other, which is 5, 6, or 7, whatever. And then how you use that data, etc., is detailed into this question. So our last question is, how do we code open-ended questions? And so what you're going to do here, I mean, these are great questions because they really allow people to respond in their own voice and in their own words. And so you want to read through all of these responses several times, because what you're trying to do is identify groupings of them, like where do the answers come out. And you'll get a general sense of this if you read through the responses multiple times. You'll see that they tend to cluster around, hopefully, just several different themes. And then you can create codes or numeric responses for those themes so that you can code the data. This goes into a little bit more detail than that, but that should give you some good start for your reading in these 100 questions. This is a good time to take a pause. Again, get up, stretch, get a coffee, get a drink, get something to eat, step outside. But what are the things you like to do but haven't been doing? It's important to take care of yourself even in the midst of busyness. In fact, when you're really busy, that's probably when it's even more important to take care of yourself. Things that matter most must never be at the mercy of things that matter least. Goethe. And all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us, by Tolkien. So hit pause, take a break, and then come back and finish the lecture. Our next text reading comes from 52 Things, and we're going to be looking at chapters or things number 25 through 35. The first group continues in section 4, Understanding Data. 25, mo data, mo problems. So this is a very common thing. People think if they ask more questions that they're going to get more information, which is true, but it doesn't mean that that information is going to be more helpful. In fact, it often just complicates things, and it also leads to some bad judgments, because you have so much data, you're looking for patterns, and certainly patterns are going to evolve when you have more data, but they may not be relevant patterns. And so that's what this section is really talking about, is focusing on the business need that you have and figuring out relevant data. They give a really interesting example in here using the band Van Halen and their contract, and because they had highly technical equipment and needed to be sure that the the needs for that equipment were going to be addressed, they buried a simple request, which was that they have M&Ms in their dressing room and that all the brown M&Ms be removed. And I've heard this story before, but not in this context. Most people thought, okay, these are just celebrities being entitled. And the way it's related here is that when they walked into their dressing room, including their crew, if they saw that there were M&Ms and the brown were removed, they believed that venue paid great attention to detail in their contracts, so likely they paid the same amount of attention to the technical requirements. So it was a real easy alert for them. If they went in there and they had M&Ms but there were brown ones, well, then they would make sure they would go through and check everything in great detail. Quite interesting. 26, creating useful signals from noise. This is a really interesting section as well. And it begins the story with a great example about a pool table and a pay pool table where you put in coins, etc., to get the pool balls out. And it talks about how we often look at obvious answers and think we have it, as opposed to delving deeper. And often the obvious answer is the wrong answer. And so it's talking about how do you look at all this data and then figure out what is the right data to use. And they have a number of things here to make sure that you get the right data, included looking at behavior, how to transform the data, which was another interesting example in there, reverse engineering the buying process, seeing how people decide what to buy by going backwards, identifying decisive moments, so you could figure out, is this a good time to make an offer, and also grouping features, etc. Very interesting. 27, expertise helps, but it often comes from unexpected sources. Great chapter again. Expert insight helps, but we often pick the top expert in a field and not the expert in the specific thing we need. And again, the examples in these sections and chapters, I think, really help clarify the material. Here they were talking about, the example they used was they had high order offers and medium offers, or medium and low offers to customers, and they'd send out packages, leave them without signatures. But some of the packages were being stolen more often than others. And so they had all these theories about why they were taken. And it wasn't until they asked someone from shipping who immediately identified the problem was that the ones that were being taken were wrapped in clear packaging so people could see what was inside of them. And all the other experts didn't have this insight into the packaging. So someone from shipping who was not considered an expert in the marketing material or marketing or in security was actually the one that helped them. So really kind of thinking about who are your experts and again what you're trying to figure out, getting closer to the issue can really make a big difference. Beware of conventional wisdom. Don't mindlessly accept common definitions or ideas. To take the time to challenge if they are true or appropriate. This is huge. That's that old thing of when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. That it's really, and this is a hard thing to pull out because we all do this. It's part of our, even I think it's part of the way we operate mentally and almost instinctually. Like, patterns really help us. And so, we learn pretty early what a doorknob is. So if something has a doorknob in it, we know if we turn it, it's probably going to open a door. And so that pattern is really reinforced. And that happens in other areas in very subtle ways. And this is really cautioning us about how we jump to conclusions, accept what everyone else accepts. And if you can get beyond that, you become much more valuable. And not just in the area of creating surveys. If you can do this in your own business place, if you can look outside conventional wisdom and notice errors, that really helps. And I'll even tell you, like, today I had a conversation with the registrar because they print out class rosters and each student is on 2 rows. Well, in a spreadsheet. Well, as an instructor who uses that for many functions in your class as well, this is really cumbersome because I can't do any sorting. If you are on 2 rows, I need each student to be a row. And so it was something that they didn't have any insight into. They were trying to make it more visually um, easy to read and not realizing that what they were providing was a tool that was much more useful in many different ways. Our next section is section 5, using data. And here we go back to one of the things that we learned early on. It was talking about, when people buy a drill, they're not really buying a drill, they're buying a hole. They want to make a hole. And so here we're talking about using data, and the subtext is the drills and the holes, that you have to figure out both the tool and the technique. The tool being the drill and the technique being what are you really trying to achieve. The flaws of average. Great chapter. Definitely read this. Averages are something that we use and overuse, and there are a lot of great examples here and a lot of funny examples in this book as well, or in this chapter. Specifically that if you only look at averages, you could get skewed data. So if you have one really large input data point, that can skew your average. A couple of the examples, I love the one. It says, I feel fine. My head is in the refrigerator and my feet are in the oven. I feel fine. So my average temperature is good. Meanwhile, my feet are baking and my head is freezing. So, you can't get a better lesson point than that. So you've got to look at the data. Make sure if there are outliers. Outliers are when you have, something that's really outside the range or throwing off the scale. That's important to look at. Correlation is not causality. We've already talked about this in previous modules. Again, I like this guy. He gives some good, fun examples that make the reading easier to keep up with. And here, he's got a plan that if we want to reduce global warming, we have to create more pirates, which is a kind of a funny thing that talks about correlation is not causality. Things can be related to each other, correlation, but it doesn't mean they cause each other. But this is a very intuitive jump that most of us make. Even skilled researchers make this and have to kind of catch themselves. Because again, I think it's part of our human nature that when we see two things together repeatedly, we think that they're related in such a way as one causes the other. It gives a great example here about them marketing for a grocery store chain or a product. And, their advice was to buy more store shelf, because that when they looked at their data, they could see that more store shelf led to greater sales. And what he alludes to in here is no, it was actually the opposite. When the store noticed that a product was selling better, they wanted to sell more items, so they gave it more store shelf. So it wasn't that the store shelf caused the sales caused the store shelf. Big one, and especially when you're interpreting your data, make sure that you pay attention to this. What doesn't necessarily tell you why? Another great one, okay? Market research needs big data to accurately understand customer behaviors. Big data needs market research to understand why customers behave as they do. Now, the data is just that. It's the data you collect. Market research is kind of the focus groups. It's asking people why they do, okay? The what is the market research, right? I can tell that who bought what by looking at their credit card data, by looking at Amazon, etc. But why they did it is the market research behind it. And that's what he's talking about here. That, these are a kind of a 1-2 punch. You can't, some people will say you no longer need market research because we can see what people are doing. And even to his own point, he says behavior is more important than attitude, etc., or demographics. But if you really want to understand not only what they're buying, but why they're buying it, you really need to do both. Number 32, the 3 T's: targeted, tailor, and timing. Sending the wrong message at the wrong time often negates the impact of good targeting, sending people messages of interest to them. Communication should be well targeted and relevant, which is to say tailored and timely. So you want to see, all he's talking about here is if you can do this, if you can send a messages that's targeted, you've got a target audience for the product, diapers for parents, be an example. Tailor the message specific to what that audience might need or want, and then timely at the right moment, you're going to increase your marketability, etc. One of the things he talks about, like, if you look at location data and you see that someone's pulling into a car lot and then you send them a ad about another car lot, it's not timely. It's targeted and tailored because you know that it's likely that they're buying a car, and maybe even the brand you could tailor it somewhat, but it's not timely because they're already in a car lot. Do you think they're probably made a move, etc. So again, I like the examples in these. It makes each of these ideas and concepts easier to digest. Big segments still matter. Okay. Drive targeting and messaging with hundreds of micro segments, but use larger macro segments for product and value proposition. So big data is common now, and data mining. Why do you think the people at Google are the richest people on the planet, right? Because they have all of this information about what we're looking at, what we're buying, how much time we spend in different sites and information. So that micro data really helps customers, and that's what they're getting paid for. They're getting, an ad. I mean, you look up a Toyota Camry. Well, the next few sites that you look at on your computer, you're going to have ads about Toyotas or Camrys or maybe similar cars there. But what he's talking about here is that while that's really good for sales, to figure out value propositions, to figure out, features on your product or service, that you have to kind of look at broader swatches of, what's happening across the board. If I'm trying to sell a Toyota Camry, yes, I want to use the big data and find the targeted, tailored, timely person. But when I'm trying to develop a new car or a new addition or feature, then I'm going to look at more of the segmentation. Location, location, location. Here again, good examples, and he talks about the difference between knowing where someone is at the moment. They're in a car lot or they're just walking into, I think this is the one that uses the shopping mall, or uses an airport, and unfortunately they didn't recognize. Anyway, let me stop there for a minute. Location, location, location. So we have all this stuff that's telling, marketers and Google and all these people where we are at any moment with our phone. But he's talking about knowing where I am at any specific time is not as valuable as understanding my history and patterns of location. So that's where the airport one came in. It's like, if you work at the airport, maybe you go in at 9 in the morning and leave at 5 every day. Well, if they send an ad to everyone who's at the airport, that means those people are going to get those ads twice a day at least, if not more often, because they're still in the airport. Decisions are rarely, this is what he says, why the patterns matter more. Decisions are rarely made in real time. One-off location is messy, meaning they can't often pinpoint it and it's inaccurate. Patterns provide more actionable insight, and understanding patterns helps to avoid frustrating users. So those are all really good things. Behavioral rules, models rule. Models are the driver behind successful customer relationship management targeting. The most impactful, actionable ones leverage behavior and downplay demographics. So he's talking about, a lot of marketers still focus on who, what, and where, the demographics, but successful modeling begins with what he calls a propensity model. That is a model that's built to measure someone's propensity to own or use a product, and these are best looked by looking at behaviors. I'm trying to think of the example, and it's not coming to me. how you can relate one thing to another. And I know he's used something. I can't find any of the specific examples I was looking for, but I like the end. He says, the moral of the story must surely be when you try and sell what you want to sell, people may not buy, but when you try to sell what they are interested in, they probably will buy. And so this is what he's talking about, looking at people's behavior and then making kind of hypotheses about what they're likely to buy based upon what they bought in the past. Surprise, surprise. Our first Canvas learning material is another glossary over survey terms. So again, take your time through this. Take some good notes or print it out and stick it in your notes. So our next Canvas material is Surveys as Quantitative Inquiry Tools. And it starts with the researcher interview video. It's an interesting video about how a faculty member at UNT uses surveys. And then we have some brief explanation content that covers survey inquiry overview, ethics and survey research. A lot of this should starting to be feeling familiar. So we're touching it in different ways. It's kind of like walking around a mountain. You're going to get to see the scenery again, but in a different perspective. And most importantly on this page is the survey design components. Again, most of these you've seen before, some in more depth, some more lightly. But what is the purpose of your survey? Looking at the population and sample. Now this is really important to your survey project because remember that the sample that you're doing is your classmates in this class. So you need to be thinking about that when you're picking your hypothesis and your content, because that is the sample you're given. So while this is a great project, I think, for understanding surveying, it obviously has a limitation is that in that we picked the sample before we picked the concept. So you need to be mindful of that when you're doing your project as a team, that the people that you're surveying are your classmates. And so, for example, if you were trying to maybe figure out something about a government employees, well, you cannot really validate that in our class. Maybe a few people work in the government, but it wouldn't be a reliable sample. Okay, so be mindful of that when you're picking your survey concept and hypothesis, etc. Looking at the validity and reliability. Are you actually testing? Is your questions and survey actually getting the data you need? And if you do it multiple times, would you get the same answers? Variables, your independent variables and your dependent variables, what are you actually evaluating, how they relate to each other, specific variables, etc. And then also the data analysis. So it's not very long, and by now some of this stuff should be getting stronger with you because we're revisiting it in a different package, if you will. Our next Canvas material is about survey administration and composition. Here we're looking at how do you actually administer the survey. For example, most questionnaires are self-administered, where you just give a paper test or a computer test and the respondent just fills it out on their own. Online surveys are very popular now because you can hit a larger sample population. And most people are quite used to doing surveys either with their phone or computer. You might do interview surveys. This could be in person. It could also be via the telephone, although telephone surveys I don't think do very well. With interviewers, you can get response rates up to 80 to 85%, which is a pretty high percentage. And then we're looking at how do you create survey questions and some guidelines for that. Even to the point of having, and we've seen this before in a prior module, about how your questionnaire looks. If it looks really busy, like a page in a novel where it's just words full, then it's much more stressful to survey respondents to read it. You should have questions spaced out, a lot of white space on your page. Try to, a question per line. Try not to keep asking duplicate questions. Some types of surveys do they're not necessarily duplicate questions, but duplicate content, trying to come at it from different areas, especially personality tests do. And then be careful of the length. again, long surveys, people are less likely to respond. If you do Likert scales, make sure that the scale is easy to understand and makes sense, easy to answer. Look at how you're ordering questions, the use of open-ended versus close-ended questions. There's something called contingency questions where you answer one question and depending upon your answer, you'll go to other questions. Matrix questions is again kind of a Likert scale type thing. And these are really well documented in here and good examples. So take your time on this, take some good notes. And this is really important to your own survey design. Our final materials from Canvas are 3 really interesting videos. 2 of them are TED Talks. The first is Alan Smith, Why You Should Love Statistics, and it's quite a fun video and has some great examples and great graphics about, even if math isn't your thing, how statistics can be very interesting and engaging for all of us because they tell us things about ourselves, and they also kind of hold up places where we have the wrong impression about how things are, what the percentages are, etc. So don't miss this video. The second video is on how statistics can be misleading, and it talks about Simpson's paradox and how when there's lurking variables, how your analysis and report can be totally skewed. And he again gives some great examples, and don't miss that video. It's very short. And finally, better user research through surveys. This is a very short video. I don't even think it's 3 minutes long. And of all of these, this one is really relevant because it's talking about building the survey through and some traps you should avoid and some things you should do. So make sure you check out all of those materials as well. Probably more fun than some of the reading you've had to do.